Okay, so today, lecture 25, today is Wednesday, December 9th. We will be doing writing equations. Now, when we write down equations, we're going to be putting them in slope-intercept form, just like we did on Monday. So let's take a minute and let's review what slope-intercept means. So slope-intercept form. So slope-intercept form is going to be y equals mx plus b. Y equals mx plus b. The y is a variable. The x is a variable. But m and b are going to be numbers. So what does m stand for? M stands for slope. One way to think about slope is rise over run. Or you can think about it as y2 minus y1 on the top and x2 minus x1 at the bottom. So that's what slope is. That's going to be the m. M is always going to be attached to the x. And b is going to be the y-intercept. B is going to be the y-intercept. Now, we can get the y-intercept by letting x be 0. Letting x be 0. Now, when x is 0, that means that the first coordinate is going to be 0, but whatever the y-intercept is, that's going to be b. So I'll give you guys a few seconds to copy that down, and then we're going to look at some graphs. We're going to be looking at the graph. It's going to show us a line. We're going to take that line, put it in y equals mx plus b form. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to look at the graph, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find the slope. So the first thing is find the slope. That's going to be m. There are 4 choices for m, right? It could be a positive number, it could be a negative number, it could be 0, or it could be undefined. And that's going to be based on what the graph looks like. So we're going to be asking ourselves, okay, is the graph going up? Is the graph going down? Is it completely flat, like it's horizontal, or is it completely vertical, like it's undefined? Those are going to be the 4 choices for slope. And then the second thing we're going to do is we're going to find the y-intercept. Find the y-intercept. We're going to find where the graph crosses the y-axis. That is called the y-intercept. And whatever number that is, whether it's positive, whether it's negative, whether it's 0, we're going to write that down for b. So really, the only 2 things we need to find is the m and the b. The y and the x are variables, and they're going to fall into place. They are never going to change, but m and b can change as they want. Okay? Let's look at a few graphs. All right, we're going to be looking at the problem set, and I want to look at number 1 first. So I'm going to zoom in on that as much as I can. Okay, so looking at number 1, the first thing I see is the line is going up. So the line is going up like this. That means that the slope is going to be positive. The slope is going to be positive. That's the first thing I see. So it's not going to be a negative number, so we can safely cross out b. That's not going to be the case. The slope has to be positive. But what number is the slope? That's the trick. We can do rise over run to find out what the slope is. Now, you can choose 2 points from the graph. It doesn't really matter which 2 points you choose. I'm going to be choosing this point right here and this one right here. I'm going to be looking at these 2 points, and we can go from the coordinates of those points, or we can do rise over run. Let's start off with rise over run. I think that would be easier to think about. So, how far does the graph rise from the 2 points, and how far does the graph run from the 2 points? Well, from the first point to the next point, how far are we going up? We're going up 3, right? 1, 2, 3. So the rise is going to be positive 3. It's going up 3 basically. And then how far are we going to the right? How far is the run? Well, to get from the first point to the next point, we are going 1, 2. So the run is going to be 2. Okay, so that's 3 over 2, right? So we already know what the slope is. It's going to be 3/2. So I can get rid of A, I can get rid of D. Those two don't have the right slope number, so I know the answer is going to be C, 3/2 x plus 3. So this is the slope. That's the first thing that we have to find. That's always going to be the first thing we have to find for these. So the slope, or the m, is going to be 3 over 2. Okay. Now the next thing we have to do is we have to find out what the y-intercept is. So we're asking ourselves, where does the graph cross the y-axis? Where does the graph cross the y-axis? That's a good question. Well, it looks like it's going to cross the y-axis here. That's going to be at 1, 2, 3. So I know that b is going to be equal to positive 3 because it crosses the y-axis at positive 3, right? That's the y-intercept. And that's the last thing we have to find. So now that we know what the m is and we know what the b is, we can write out our equation as y equals mx plus b. So y equals, okay, what is m? 3 over 2. So 3 over 2 x plus b. And b is 3, so I'm going to put in 3. So that's why C is the right answer and why the other ones don't make any sense. Okay. Next, we're going to look at number 2. And I'll give you guys a few seconds to get that down. You don't have to draw the picture of the graph, but you do have to write down what M and B are. That's the point. So once you got those 2 pieces of information, you can write your answer as y equals mx plus b. So that's what we're going to be doing for the 10 questions today. Although I'll probably do half those. Okay, let's look at number 2. Now, looking at the graph, it's going up from left to right, so I know the slope is also going to be positive. So the slope is positive. That means I can get rid of all the equations that have a negative slope. So the slope right here is -1, that's no good, get rid of that. This slope right here is a -2, that's no good, get rid of that. So really it's between A and D. And it looks like the y-intercept is -2, so it's probably going to be A. But let's go ahead and find the 2 sources of information first. So I know the y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis. That's going to be -2. So I know that B is going to be -2. Now, where is the slope? We can find that 2 ways, right? We can use the slope formula, or we can use rise over run. Let's do the slope formula this time. So m is going to be equal to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. This is another way we can find slope, right? But we got to know what our 2 points are so we can plug them into the formula. So how do we get our 2 points? Well, we can take one from the y-axis. This is 0, -2. So 0, -2, that's going to be my first point. And then the next point, that would be 3, 2. So that would be kind of right here. I know this is going to cross through that point. So that point is 3, 2. Now, I'm not sure if the graph is going to cross through this point or this point because it doesn't really go straight through them. It kind of meanders a little bit. So I'm not going to take those two. I'm going to choose the one that I know the graph is running through. It's going to run through this point for sure. So we're going to use these 4 numbers. We're going to plug them into this formula and see what we get. So the m is going to be 2 minus -2 on top. And then the x coordinates are going to be 3 minus 0. 3 minus 0. So on top, we've got 2 minus -2. That's actually going to be a +4, right? And on the bottom, I have 3 minus 0, and we know that's going to be 3. So the slope is 4/3. I know that 4/3 is going to work right here. So we find our slope, we find our y-intercept. We can write our answer as y equals mx plus b. So y equals 4/3 x. B is -2, so I'm going to have a -2. Okay. The next one we're going to look at is number 3. All right, let's take a look at number 3. Now, looking at this graph, we have a vertical line, right? So we know our slope is going to be vertical. Slope is vertical. That means that the slope is undefined. Undefined. So that means we're not going to have a number in front of the x like we want. But that's okay. So what's our y-intercept? Does the graph cross through the y-axis at all? No, and it never will. So there's no m, there's no b, so our answer is going to be looking quite different, right? So what would be the best representation for this vertical line? Well, if we have a vertical line, our answer is always going to be x equals something. Because see how the line is going to cross through -2 right here? It crosses through -2 on the x-axis. So I know that x is going to equal -2. X equals -2. I can't even put my answer in a y form, right? So my answer is going to be D, -2. So that's if you have a vertical line. Next, we're going to look at what happens when we have a horizontal line or a slope of 0. This line is going to be completely flat. Let's look at this next one right here. I'll call this number 4, but it's really number 1 on your classwork. So looking at this one, our line is completely flat. It's horizontal. And does it have a slope? Well, it actually does have a slope, right? Because if we have a horizontal line, then the slope is going to be 0. So I'm going to have y equals 0x plus what? Now we need to find out what the y-intercept is. So where does this graph cross the y-axis? It crosses the y-axis right here at -2. -2. So 0x plus -2. So which of these answers best represents that? Well, for B, the slope is 2. Our slope is 0, right? So we can't have that. We can't even have D or C either because the slope isn't 0 there. We would have to choose A. So just like how we did last time, when we have a slope of a horizontal line, we're only going to have y equals some number. Now, if you know that anything times 0 is 0, that means that this 0x isn't going to show up in our answer because this whole thing is equal to 0. We're just going to have y equals -2. So horizontal lines are always going to have y equals something. But like the last one that we did, vertical lines are always going to have x equals something. So that's the difference between those. You might want to write that down. In fact, I will. Horizontal lines, they take the form of y equals some number. Let's call it b. But vertical lines, they take the form of x equals some number. Let's just call it a. So that's the difference between horizontal lines and vertical lines. Okay, let's look at the next one. Now for this one, notice that the graph is going down. The graph is going down from left to right. So I know that the slope is going to be negative this time. So I can safely cancel out A and B. They have positive slopes. That's not going to work. So it's either between C or D. And they both have the same y-intercept. We know that the y-intercept is going to be way up here, which is 5. So the graph is going to cross the y-axis at 5. That's not really in question. What is in question is, what is the slope? Let's use rise over run to figure that out. So m is equal to rise over run. We're going to choose 2 points from the graph. Let's choose the point that I just made up there. And let's choose this point right here. 1, 3. Okay. So from the first point to the next point, how far does the graph rise or fall? Well, it's falling 2, which means it's rising -2. So the rise is going to be -2. So that means the graph is actually falling from left to right. So we're going down 2, 1, 2. But how far is the graph going to the right? Well, between this point and this point, it's only going to the right once. So that's going to be a 1. So I've got -2 over 1. If I divide those two numbers, that's going to give me that -2 that I want right here. So I know it's going to be C. M equals -2. So I know what the slope is. I know what the y-intercept is. Now I can write my answer as y equals mx plus b. So y equals -2x plus 5. All right. Let's do one more, and then we'll look at your classwork. Let's look at this next one right here. And I'm going to have to zoom out for this one. Zoom out again. There we go. Perfect. All right. So for this one, what would the slope be? Would it be positive or would it be negative? Is the graph rising or is it falling from left to right? It's falling, right? So the slope has to be negative. It's got to be negative because it's falling from left to right. Okay? So what is the slope going to be? Well, we can choose 2 points. We can do the slope formula, or we can use the rise over run. I know that we have a point right here and right here. That's indisputable, right? So how far is the graph going to fall from this point to this point? It actually only falls 1. So the m is going to be -1 on the top. Okay. Now, how far does it run? How far does it go to the right or the left? Well, it goes right 3 times. 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to put a +3 under here. So my slope is going to be -1/3. So that only matches up with D. So I know my M is -1/3. Now, what's my B, or my Y-intercept? Where does it cross the Y-axis? Crosses at 1. So B is going to be 1. So I can write that as Y equals -1/3 X plus 1. Okay. Now let's go over to Desmos and let's graph answer choice D. So I'm going to go over to my calculator, which is right here. There we go. Okay. So now you see with Desmos that the screen is kind of divided. It's divided into a left side and a right side. The left side is going to be your inputs. So I can type in whatever I want on the left side, and it's going to show me a graph of it on the right side. So let's graph Y equals -1/3 times X plus 1. There we go. We get this purple line. Now you can go over here on the left side and you can change the color of the line if you want, but it doesn't really matter for our purposes. Notice that it crosses the y-axis here at 0, 1. So 1 is going to be the y-intercept. And the slope is always in front of x, so the slope is -1/3. You can get a point from here and here. Okay? And you can use those 2 points in the slope formula, or you can use the rise over run. Whichever way you want to find the slope, it doesn't really matter. Just make sure you're using 2 points. Okay.